Customer experience leaders are often the unsung heroes of a business, and that's a good thing.
Our work as CX leaders is about giving information and then backing out of the spotlight so that people can find their way and take the glory for the work. That's why I call it being the human duct tape or the glue of the organization.
Making certain the customer's experience is a priority for all areas of the business. On this episode of the CX Leader Podcast.
The CX Leader Podcast with Steve Walker is produced by Walker, a business consulting firm that helps our clients unlock the potential of their customer experiences by placing the customer at the heart of all their business decisions. You can find out more at walkerinfo.com.
Hello, I'm Pat Gibbons, Senior Vice President and Principal at Walker. I'm filling in today for Steve Walker as the guest host of the CX Leader Podcast, and thank you for listening. On the CX Leader Podcast, we explore topics and themes to help leaders like you leverage all the benefits of customer experience and help your customers and prospects want to do more business with you. Today, we're continuing our series that introduces you to luminaries of customer experience, those CX rock stars that have helped define and improve how companies identify ways to improve the experience their customers have in doing business with them. And Jeanne Bliss is certainly one of those luminaries. She is the founder and president of CustomerBliss and is a consultant and thought leader on customer experience. And many of you are likely aware she's a co-founder of the CXPA, the Customer Experience Professionals Association. She has held leadership roles at companies such as Land's End, Microsoft, Coldwell Banker, and on top of all of that, she's a best-selling author. And we'll talk about her latest book, Would You Do That to Your Mother? Jeanne, thank you for being on today's podcast.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. Nice to be with you.
You know, Jeanne, we always start by asking a little bit about the background of our guests, and you really have an interesting background, so I kind of want to break it down a bit. So first of all, just how did you get into CX? And I realize it probably wasn't even referred to that as CX at the time, but was that when you were at Land's End? Was that your first stop? And how did that occur?
Well, so my first job at Land's End was training 2,500 phone operators that were customer experience. In many ways, they're on product and service. And I began peppering Gary Comer, the founder, with things we needed to do because I was listening to customers and the people talking to them on a regular basis. And about a year into that role, he took me off that job and I became essentially the first version of a CX leader at Land's End. He called me the conscience of the company. We were growing 80% a year. Land's End was exploding. You know, a lot of ways I characteristic is this for people is we were really the Zappos of our time. Yeah. And for me and my career, it defined and created the path to go forward that we would that my career would have going forward. For example, we did touch point mapping in 1984. We mapped all the touch points. When we went public in 1997, a 26-year-old version of me presented to financial analysts the relationship between customer experience and ROI and growth. So it was really a defining moment for me at Land's End. I was there for 10 years and then decided I wanted to deliberately move to multiple industries to continue to build my kit bag.
It is really interesting. You know, I have to admit, I remember a particular experience. So this is validation that this stuff all makes sense. I was a longtime Land's End customer, and I had one of their canvas briefcases, which, if you think back, those had been very popular. And when I had a small puppy at home, it got a hold of that and chewed the zipper up. And I thought, what the heck? I'm just going to put it in the box, mail it to Land's End, ask them to put a new zipper on, and I'll pay whatever the charge is. And naturally, it just came back repaired, no bill. And again, it's one of those things where I can't tell you how many times I've told that story. So those are those lessons that really make sense and build a business. And they certainly
and actually, and that's right. And those were the conscious decisions that really become foundational for an organizational and is a thread that's run through not only all of my books, but more importantly, the work I've done in the 4 other organizations where I was essentially the first version of chief customer officer. But it's customer experience at the end of the day is choosing how you will grow and what you won't do to grow. Are you going to nickel dime customers, or are you going to make decisions such as what we did at Land's End on a regular basis to build memories and confirm in people's minds that you're a good company to do business with? Those decisions as companies grow and that conscience actually gets harder and harder to embed, especially as you bring new people into an organization who are very good tactically, but may or may not be in alignment with the culture that got the organization to where it is.
Yeah, and so many organizations are so focused on their process, and
Right.
understandably so. They want to make it smooth, easy, but it's not always what the customer wants. Maybe touch on a couple of the other industries that you were in and the companies you worked with.
Sure. So my practitioner journey continued. After that, I went to Mazda Motor of America. They were seeking the top 3 leaders from the top 3 organizations leading customer experience. And so we came together. There was another woman from Xerox and a gentleman from Caterpillar. Those, along with Land's End, were pretty premier in that area in the early 90s. So I went to Mazda, and my role there was reporting the chief American officer, really building out the dealership processes. I wanted to be part of more of a manufacturing organization, and so stayed there for a number of years. After that, I wanted to be a part of the field organization and leadership from that standpoint, and also have more of a B2B2C role. And so went to Coldwell Banker Corporation, where our job was serving and supporting the franchisees. There, interestingly, also my team built the first version for buying and selling homes on the internet. We had to create the value equation for the agents for giving up their hallowed MLS. After that, I knew I needed to add in financial services and really grow my kit bag to work in a much larger organization. So went to Allstate. I was the first version of a vice president for customer satisfaction and retention, is what we called it at the time. These titles evolve. And there really worked through the agency experiences, as well as we created the framework when I was there. I created the groundwork for many of the wonderful things that you're seeing Allstate doing and showing up as there are many interesting approaches to the insurance industry. And then finally, my last stop corporately was at Microsoft, and I was the general manager of worldwide customer partner loyalty.
Now, as you think back, and maybe for a moment think back to that first role at Land's End, how has it changed? Like when you think of customer experience leaders today, are there some key primary things that have not changed, or has it just changed in so many different ways? How would you characterize that?
Well, I think that it's got a title now, and there's more awareness around it. At the end of the day, though, the foundational element for this work to succeed is that it has to be grounded in leadership. It has to be grounded in leaders taking responsibility and accountability for the improvement of not only customers' lives, but employees' lives. And quite honestly, where we see this work not succeeding is when we're over focusing on process or tactics or work streams and not embedding leadership engagement, culture change, and the underbelly work of the organization. And so while the work has gained steam, certainly the commonalities that I was working with since 1983 still exist, because we have humans inside of organizations who are organized in many ways by silos, doing very well-intentioned, sectioned off work, very proud of that work, but that is in fact what is our work from a customer experience standpoint, is to unite the organization and leaders. And that continues to be probably the most important part of this work.
Yeah, did you have times, I'm assuming you did, where, like you said, there might be a department that has worked very hard to develop a strong process and everything, and you had to basically go in and say, it's not working for the customer?
Well, yeah, the key to doing that is facilitating the conversation so that they reach that conclusion themselves. You never, walking into a room and calling somebody's baby ugly never works well. And I think that, in some of the organizations where I was leading customer experience, for example, one of them I walked into a team of people who were going in and auditing the field and then presenting them almost a report card on what they were doing. And very well-intended process, but you could imagine how that was received. Instead, in the work that I do and coach leaders to do, it's around facilitating a conversation with leaders and then multiple levels of the organization by seeing the customer, talking to them, and then reaching and understanding that conclusion, not only empirically with numbers, but also humanly, trying to help them realize what we've most of the time inadvertently pushed them to have to work through.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm involved in our local CX group, and I think that is probably one of the most challenging but valuable discussions that we get into when we talk about how to do that and manage that situation, with people. And it is, it's not just saying, look at the scorecard, we got to do something different. It's really working with them, making them part of the answer to make it all work.
That's right. In fact, the foundation and the gift of my 25 years of being a practitioner is being able to guide and help people with that work. Because at the end of the day, our work as CX leaders is about uniting, giving information, and then backing out of the spotlight so that people can find their way and take the glory for the work. And I think we lose sight of that really important role. It's why I call it being, the human duct tape or the glue of the organization. We're enabling and creating perspective that people don't have otherwise. The CEO of an organization has a false positive in the way data and metrics and information is presented. And so what we want to do is open that up, but give people the power to be a part of that solution.
Yeah, no, that's, I think, a great perspective about how to be able to be the catalyst for these things, but step aside and let other people take the credit for solving it.
And not judge. Judging doesn't do anybody any good.
Yeah, we have too many egos around to worry about that. So
and people are working hard. People are working hard. It's just the separateness is what gets in the way of the experience.
So let's talk about your books. I mentioned your most recent one, but you have 3 before that. Why don't you just touch on those and tell us a little bit about how you got into authoring books and what you've written so far?
Sure, of course. So as I mentioned, 5 versions of a chief customer officer, Land's End, Mazda, Allstate, Microsoft, and Coldwell Banker Corporations. I left Microsoft in 2002, and at that point, I really had navigated my path in a deliberate way, traversing industries, making sure that I was credible. And so after I left Microsoft, I said, okay, I've got to write this down. I've got to figure out how to give people some kind of roadmap that I wish I had on my desk when I was pushing the rock up the hill. And so we went through one of our children had leukemia, so I took about 1.5 years off. She's fine now. And then in 2004, in earnest, started writing my first book called Chief Customer Officer, Getting Past Lip Service to Passionate Action. It really was the first book speaking to our community about this work that we do. And it was an interesting sell, in fact, to my publisher, Josie Bass Wiley at the time, because they didn't want to call it that. The first title they wanted to call it was Customer Ownership. I said, that's actually the antithesis of what this is. And so they said, well, 5 people are going to buy this book. I said, no, this is not. This is also a book of where we need to go. It's a beacon book. And so what was great about that book was that it got down on paper a lot of what people were struggling with. So that book came out in 2006. By 2009, I also wanted to write what I think about as the beacon book. If you think about the books I write, the CCO series is how to work through the mechanics and culture and the labyrinth of an organization to get to an end state. The Beacon books, the book I wrote in 2009 or was published, I Love You More Than My Dog, and my most recent book, which I'll talk about in a second, are really to show you the behaviors of companies that have achieved a state of belovedness, of being loved so much by their customers and employees that, these people market for them.
Yeah.
And so in 2009, that book came out called I Love You More Than My Dog, 5 decisions that drive extreme customer loyalty in good times and bad. I wanted to get something simpler out into the marketplace that really showed a spotlight on the behaviors of these companies. In 2015, the new CCO book came out called Chief Customer Officer 2.0, How to Build Your Customer-Driven Growth Engine, because the world had changed. We had gone through a pretty terrible economic downturn. Social media had kicked in much stronger than before, of course, and leaders throughout all of that thing were recognizing 2 things. One, that organic growth is truly a differentiating ROI way to achieve a return on your investment in a growth engine. And 2, that the silos don't organically unite themselves. And also, because I had been coaching essentially since 2002, I wanted to update my kit bag. And so the CCO 2.0 book is about 95% new content from the first book published in 2006. It's really a complete approach.
Yeah, your latest book is Would You Do That to Your Mother? And I have to admit, when I learned of this book, I took to the cleverness of the title. But what really surprised me was how you could really weave that question throughout the book and how well it fit to things like, begging for survey scores or being on hold or waiting for a service person to call. The mother context, it really works. So how'd you come up with that?
Well, again, it started from a mission, which was, now customer experience is in our vernacular, and it's great that it's in our vernacular, but we're focusing a lot on the mechanics versus the meaning of the work, which is to improve humans' lives. And also in our zest for getting good at the mechanics, we tend to lose the person who's in all of this. So I wanted to find a way to help people take personal accountability and envision their customer. And it's one day the mom title came up to me. And again, the importance of the book was, let's make it simple. So there's 32 case studies, but what's interesting about the 32 case studies is they are the 32 things that define our interactions in our lives as customers. As you go through those 32 case studies, you as a human and a person of the world will have encountered every single one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and that's why the case studies I call a case study to make mom proud, because these are companies who are choosing to act in a different way.
Yeah, listeners should know that the case studies really do give it the kind of the heft, the real great examples. I don't know if there's one that really stands out to you. You have so many, but any that could you mention one for our listeners?
Gosh, there's a lot that I really like. I love the last chapter is called Take the High Road, and they were about not nickel and diming, trusting your customers, trusting your employees. I think that chapter in particular is probably the hardest chapter for organizations to make changes in those 8 areas of case study, because they really do challenge the rigor of the organization and the balance sheet, and kind of challenges them to walk away from some easy short-term approaches that actually, by walking away, you earn the organic growth of customers who truly do respect you as an organization and as people. So, for example, there's one example in there around Raul Leal and Virgin Hotels that got rid of the nickel and diming in hotels. So they don't charge you for bringing your food up to the room. They don't charge you for Wi-Fi. They also have what they call street pricing, which is whatever you can pay for that Snickers bar or a bottle of water at the corner market, that's what you're going to pay there. So none of that awful feeling in the middle of the night as you're opening up a $7 bottle of water. Other things in that chapter, for example, are getting rid of gotcha moments. There's a library in the book that actually got rid of late fees, because the whole point of the library systems in the United States and around the world is to enrich young minds. But yet those late fees get in the way of reading. And so they found a way to make it be less about the late fees and more about just your conscience. And if you don't bring it in, we'll give you 30 days and then another 30 days. And if it goes by for a year, we'll suspend your card and then finally charge you for the book. But they wove in to it trust and, just recognizing why they're in business in the first place or why they do the work they do. So the case studies, I worked really hard to find very operational activities that companies were making and leadership decisions in every kind of industry.
Yeah, it's they really provide a refreshing approach. The other thing the book has that I think is really interesting is there's an assessment. So a very practical way for people to kind of go through and ask some of these questions. And of course, they're in a motherly context. I happen to really like your scale. Most of us, particularly those that have a research background, are so used to poor to excellent. Our listeners should know that this goes from oh dear on the negative end to so proud on the positive end, which I thought was great.
Well, and it's funny because, and thank you for that, coming from, your business and what you do. Again, what I wanted to get people to do is, it's not a numerical scale where we can, from that standpoint, but rather as you look at your behavior and your business and your operation, are you operating in a way where your mom would kind of frown at you, or are you operating in a way where she would be proud and, really smile at your behavior and your organization, not on a one-off way, but consistently? Is that how you show up? So yeah, it's a make mom proud-o-meter at the bottom of every question.
It's great.
And there's 32 questions. Yeah. And that was the other thing. I wanted the book to be super consumable. So we can't solve everything. Part of the other challenge with this work is we tend to boil the ocean. So if you do the audit, you may find 3 things that are really sticking out for you as an organization, and you can start on those, and you'll see the tactics in the book that people talk about. Many of them don't cost any money, but more importantly, an attitude shift and a leadership shift.
Yeah. So speaking of priorities, we're at that point of the podcast where we ask what we call the take-home value question. So we know that customer experience leaders are our listeners. Jeanne, if you had one piece of advice to give them today, what would it be?
I think the important thing is to engage your leadership team and unite that leadership team. Often what happens is that in our work, we become pitchers and beggars to that team, rather than being really clear with them what customer experience is and is not, and their role that they must have in doing the work with us. The leaders who start with uniting a leadership team, creating even one version of where we are today, get further ahead because they don't constantly go back to the conversation of everybody saying, oh, but we're here. Oh, but we're here. Oh, but we're here. And, good job. Keep doing it and come back and report. You've got to move yourself from being the pitcher of the work and the beggar of their time to uniting them as a board of directors working with you to change how you do the work of the business.
Jeanne, thanks so much for your time today. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the easiest way to do that?
CustomerBliss.com is my website, and you can email me. It's Jeanne, Jeanne, at CustomerBliss.com. I'm also on LinkedIn and pretty prolific talking to folks over there as well.
Jeanne Bliss is the founder and president of CustomerBliss and is a consultant and thought leader on customer experience. You can read more about Jeanne on her website, CustomerBliss.com. She's also the author of Would You Do That to Your Mother? Read more about that at make-mom-proud.com.